Brings us to this week's session, and it is called Your Church, a Serving Church in a Selfish World. So we've talked about being a light in darkness. We've talked about being unified and loving to one another. Now we're going to look at a serving church in a selfish world. So, question for you. Pretty easy question. Are humans selfish? Thank you. I didn't even have to pause, okay? But just to pretend that I have to convince you, let's look at some reasons, some proofs of selfishness. I love the first one. We've all been one of these, and most of us have been around one of these, and if it's not the best proof of selfishness, then I don't know what it is. What's the first one? Children. Can I get an amen? Grandparents, parents, if you have been a child, or if you're around children, or if you're actively raising children right now, have you ever had to struggle with wondering if they were self-centered? No. They come out ready to say, what's their first, is their first word, here, I love you? No. What's their first word? Mine, right? They want it for themselves. It belongs to them. That's mine. I want it. If children isn't enough, what about siblings? You ever had anybody have more than one child? Raised more than one child? Anybody grow up as a sibling? Okay. So do y'all remember those road trips? You're in the back seat. What inevitably happens? You know, someone's slapping somebody. She touched me. He took my iPad. Well, when I was growing up, we didn't have iPads. I don't know what we took. He took my notebook, my lollipop, whatever. And it's so true, isn't it? When a sibling sees their sibling with something, what's the first thing they think? Wow, I'm glad they're enjoying that gift that mom and dad gave them. I just love my sibling. That's not it at all, is it? It's, I want one of those. You didn't give me the same thing that you gave her, right? Naturally, we're just selfish siblings. What about friends? You ever had friends can get jealous, right? When one friend gets the girl that the other friends wanted, right? What happens? We're gonna fight. When one girlfriend gets the boy that the other girls liked, yeah, what happens? Yeah, exactly. Well, we're selfish. Even in our friend groups where we love each other, we're close, there's still selfishness can creep in. You can see friend groups pop all to pieces, right, overnight just because somebody's selfish. What about businesses? Now, you want to talk about, we like to pick on children, don't we? We think it's cute. We think they're selfish. Look at the American corporate workplace, right? I mean, if a business can come in and buy something out and reap the reward, the benefit, they don't care who they fire, who gets bought out. If another company goes bankrupt in the process and thousands of people lose the job, what is it? That's business. Isn't that what Americans say? Why? Because money. We like the dollar. We're selfish. Because at the end of the day, even our entities we create, like businesses, that's why there were laws in the Old Testament to regulate business. There's a right way to pay wages to workers. There's a right way to treat those under your authority, and there's a wrong way, right? We don't have to go any further than this one right here. How about governments? And I got a deep one. Yeah, all the adults. I got to the adult section, right? Everyone's like, number one. Yeah, it's so true though. Governments so corrupt and easily corrupted, and in a way self-interested. Now, there's an extent to which it makes sense that a government is protecting its own people, right? That's a mandate from God. But there's one thing to protect your own people, and there's another thing to use political power to take advantage of other people groups or other governments, right? Happens all around the world, even in our own government. So if this isn't enough to prove to you that we're selfish, then obviously I just shut my case down. It's even in our vernacular. We've made ways to make it socially acceptable to be self-interested and self-centered and selfish. Look at this. Common phrases. It's a blank eat blank world. There we go. It's a dog eat dog world. You got to do what's best for you, right? You got to out there in the world. At the end of the day, you just got to accept that everybody's out for their best interest. and you got to be out there for your best interest, right? Or that dog might eat you, so you got to strike first. You have to look out for number one, right? Even Christians say these things, right? Well, at the end of the day, you got to do what's best for number one, right? And this is just a common way it's slipped into our everyday vocabulary. And this one's one of my favorites. Y'all have probably heard these commercials. As soon as I say it, you're all going to be humming it the rest of the night. It's my money, and I need it now. That's right. And just these phrases where we play in a marketing scheme towards the desire that you need what you want, right? What you want, the way you want it. Yeah, that's right. All those different things that the marketing schemes we use in American culture, especially our culture, to play on that notion that, at the end of the day, this world is kind of all about you, right? It's about you and your little universe and how you make things happen. So, are humans selfish? Yes. I think we can all agree that they are. So what we're going to do tonight is pretty simple. We're going to look at one main text. It's a little bit longer, but we're going to look at one main text, and we're going to go back to some elementary doctrines that our God and King, Jesus, established early in his ministry. And we can get so many things out of order. We can love theology. We can not love theology. We can emphasize worship. We can emphasize different aspects of the church. There's so many things that we can rank in our interest as Christians, but sometimes we lose sight of the fundamentals. Some of the most basic things of what it means to be a Christ follower, like some of his foundational teachings. So we're going to look at a foundational teaching today. So let's look at our text. It comes from Matthew 20 through 28. It'll be on the screen, and I'll read it for you. It says, "Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee," now Zebedee is James and John. Those sons of Zebedee are James and John. "The mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to him," Jesus, "and her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, 'What do you want?' Jesus said that to the mother. She said to him, 'Say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom.'" Okay? So that's the request. The mother of James and John, she wants a favor from Jesus. Look, when you establish this kingdom you're preaching, which she thinks is going to be a literal political kingdom, most likely, she said, "Will you please establish my sons? Can they sit on your right and left hand?" Meaning, can they be second in command in your kingdom? Pretty bold question for a mom, right? At least she loves her sons, right? And look what it continues to say. Jesus answered. He said, "You do not know what you're asking. Are you," he's looking at the boys, "are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?" And they, the two boys, James and John, said to him, "We are able." Is that not fascinating? They didn't know what they were saying, right? But look how humble and calmly Jesus handles it. He said to them, "Okay, you will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father." Now think about this. The cup here, you know what the cup is. It's the whole mission of Jesus. The cup of God's wrath itself. The cup of martyrdom, the cup of death and suffering for the sake of others, right? The redemptive act. He's saying, you don't know what you're asking for, ma'am, and James and John. You think this is going to be a really great place to be, but you just don't know what you're saying. Can you drink my cup? And they have the arrogance in their limited knowledge to say, "Oh yeah, we can drink your cup." And he, in his loving wisdom, he said, "Okay, well, you will drink my cup." And we know that they did, didn't they? Because they suffered and died under the cruelty of the Roman government and the Jews. So they did drink the cup. They died martyrs' deaths. But did they have the capacity to do what Jesus was actually going to do in drinking the cup? No, of course not. He said, "You may drink in my cup," but then he says, "It's not even up to me who sits on my right or left hand. That is up to my Father. My Father in heaven decides those things." We see the humility of Jesus here, even in his own kingdom. So it doesn't stop there, though. Let's look. Here's the key part we're going to hone in on, the next part of this text. And when the 10, that's the rest of the disciples, heard it, they were indignant at the two brothers. They were angry. But Jesus called them to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man," talking about himself, "came not to be served, but to" what? "But to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So look here at some very important words, okay? So he says the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, okay? And their great ones exercise authority over them. He says this is our foundational truth that we're discussing right here. It shall not be so among you. It's not going to be that way in my kingdom. This is not how it's going to work if you're a disciple of Jesus. Okay? So it's not going to be right here lording it, and it's not going to be exercising this authority the way they do that. That's not going to happen in the kingdom. But whoever would be great, look, Jesus brings in the words great. Whoever would be great among you must be what? Servant. So he connects servant with great. And whoever would be, what's that word? First among you must be an even harsher word, your slave. So he connects in his kingdom greatness with servant, right? And he connects first with slave. Totally opposite of the Gentile kingdom. Totally opposite. And then he gives us his own example. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So we're going to spend our time tonight unpacking this foundational truth. It's a paradigm, really, a lens, a set of glasses almost, that we should be putting on as Christians in the way we view our relationship to one another. So let's unpack this. Let's start with the world's dynamic, okay? Dynamic, another word for the way it works, the way the world functions, okay? We're going to look at, he gives us in this text, the way the world, even today, in the Gentile secular world, the way the world functions. So let's look at this. First of all, the world, in verse 20 and 21, we see that the world measures greatness as the ability to benefit yourself. Okay? The world measures greatness as the ability to benefit yourself. Is that not also true in today's world? I mean, think about it. We pat each other on the back, right, for the way you have pulled yourself up by your bootstraps and done well for yourself, right? We use some phrases. Did I get what I want? That's the main question the world asks. At the end of life, am I getting what I want? Do I have a comfortable retirement, good health, 2 boats, a truck, money in the bank, vacation time, a timeshare, a river house, whatever is on your list? We ask ourselves, did I get what I want? And the way you evaluate success as a Gentile, as a pagan, is if I got what I want, if the answer is yes, then that equals success. If you can say you got what you wanted out of life, out of your career, even out of marriage, have you been able to pick up on how the secular world talks about things even like marriage, right? It's really ultimately today about you and what you want out of marriage. It's not how you can love another person or serve your spouse. It's about, I really like this person because they do this for me, right? That is the Gentile pagan way of thinking about greatness or success. We measure greatness as the ability to benefit oneself. Number 2, The world defines power. So we started with greatness. Now we're going to define power. The world defines power as the ability to conform others to your will. Now, someone is powerful in politics if they can conform somebody to their will, right? A president is powerful because he has direct command over the armed forces, among many other executive powers. The sheriff of a community is very powerful, right? Because they have certain abilities that within the confines of the law, they can have someone conform to their will. If a sheriff wants you locked up, you guess where you're going. Until you get a lawyer and you can figure out why, you're going to wherever they say you're going to go. That is the world's definition of power. The ability to exercise power is shaped or quantified in how you can conform someone else to your will. Let's look at the two statements he gave us. He said they lord it over them. What's that it referring to? They lord their authority, their position, their power. They lord it over them. So perhaps you've got this in our culture, but if you need a better example, think about the culture of the day when this was written. Can you not think of a better Gentile representation of a pagan superpower in the ancient world than Rome? Rome was the power of the world at the time. The Caesars had the ability to snap a finger and move and shake things all the way across the Mediterranean Sea and halfway into a different time zone. I mean, it was an amazing thing. But that, even in you today, can you think about the allurement of that? That looks like power, doesn't it? Is that not how you were raised to see power? Power is carrying, with your Secret Service entourage, carrying a suitcase around that within 5 minutes of being notified, you can flip a suitcase open, turn a key and press a button and fire a nuclear warhead that can destroy, 5 cities. That's power, isn't it? Right? That's the Gentile half of your brain, right? The pagan half of your brain. That is what we see as might, as power, as strength, the ability to do things, to conform others to your will. Another statement, he says they exercise authority over them. Now, is this saying Jesus doesn't want any form of authority in his church? No, because he himself sent apostles, prophets, teachers, all those things he sent to his church. So he gives authority. But this does teach us, however, that the authority inside the church, now please let this sink in, the authority inside the church is to look nothing like the authority structures outside the church. Does that make sense? Now, the early church lost sight of this with the rise of the bishopric, into the Middle Ages. They saw authority by a pastor or a bishop as primarily magisterial instead of ministerial. They saw it as, in Rome, you've got Caesar, you've got the Senate, you've got the Roman army, and it goes all the way down, and he calls the shots, and the power trickles down. Well, how did the Catholic Church structure its church? Same way. We had a pope, we had cardinals, we have archbishops, we have bishops, and we have priests all the way down, right? We kind of just absorbed the Gentile version of authority. Well, it's supposed to look different. Me and Blake's authority as pastors here, there is a real authority here, but it is not a magisterial authority. I don't have the ability to lord my authority over you as your pastor and tell you what you can and can't do. Ministerial authority, a good way to understand that is the way doctors have authority over you. Can a doctor make you do anything? No. What does a doctor do, though? A doctor is a counselor about your health, right? You go to them, you explain the problem, they look into your body, they try and evaluate what's wrong, and they say, it could be this, this, and this. We're going to try this, 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 and this. And is it wise or foolish to listen to good doctors? It's wise. It is foolish to just spurn doctors left and right and say, well, I know better than all doctors. That's not very wise, right? But there's wisdom in counsel. Well, that's the same type of authority me and Blake have for you. We're like doctors. You come to us with soul problems or with things you want to learn from Scripture. We can say, well, it might be this, this, and this. We'll work on you through this. Here's some ways we can work. Now, you can cast all of that off. It would be very foolish, and it would be to your own detriment. And the Bible admonishes us to submit to the authority of our pastors, right? The ministerial authority. Same with deacons and with all leaders in the church. But this is supposed to be an authority structure that is entirely different looking and different acting than the world around us. So they lord it over them, the Gentiles do. So to put it in one word, the world's dynamic is self-serving. The way the world functions, the way power in the world functions, what is the saying? Absolute power does what? Corrupts absolutely, right? It's just true. In our hearts, our pagan hearts, our unregenerate hearts, in our left alone to ourselves, our structures, our dynamics are always self-serving. You're going to do what's in the best interest of you. So, this is the heart of what we're going to talk about tonight. What should the church's dynamic be? So if Jesus shows us how the Gentiles function, and he had a great example, he was able to point right at the Romans and say, you see how they do authority? You ain't doing that in my house, okay? So what is the church's dynamic? Let's look at this. First of all, to contrast what we just said, Jesus measures greatness as the ability to benefit others. Okay? Not to use others, not to get what you want. He measures greatness as the ability to benefit others. Greatest, what's that word I circled earlier? It was greatest. What did he link it to? Servant. So you as a Christian, you need to pray the Spirit gives you the ability to rewire those wires that are crossed by sin in your head. So in your head, greatness is things like recognition, wealth, control, power. But I want everyone that claims to be a Christian to look at the screen. Greatness, or the greatest in the kingdom, is servant. So if you want our King to see you as great in His church, then you will seek to be the greatest servant in our church. It is a relationship between you and Him. It's not about how much we see you. I think it's a really cool story. I've been studying church history for school. It's a long story. But anyway, the two guys I've been reading about are two guys in church history that greatly disagreed with one another. Okay? It was George Whitefield, the famous evangelist, and it was the Methodist guy. What's his name? John Wesley. Thank you. So, sorry, brain scattered. So it was John Wesley and George Whitefield. Now, they had some major theological differences. Major. Two totally different ways of seeing salvation and several other key doctrines. But I love this. They made up later in life and they got along. And someone asked George Whitefield late in his life, he said, do you think Brother Wesley will be in heaven? Oh, no, he said, do you think you will see Brother Wesley in heaven? He said, oh, no, I don't think I will. And they were like, oh. He said, he'll be so far closer to the throne than I will that I don't think I'll ever lay eyes on him. Because he didn't link theological acuity, right, perfection in ministry necessarily, with your proximity to God and His character. Whitefield had the wisdom to see that the greatest among us are the greatest servants. And look, nobody better than Wesley understood servanthood. If you've read anything about Wesley's life, the man lived on horseback pretty much, just constantly working in all his different ministries, just gave his life over to the service of others. He was a very humble man. So if you think about greatest is not smartest, it's not even pastors. I could name some people in this room that I know me and Blake are going to have to get binoculars to see on Judgment Day, because you're going to be so much closer to the throne than we are, and we're pastoring y'all. So it's not intellect, it's not abilities. Greatest in the kingdom is servant. Let the Spirit connect those wires for you today. Reconnect those. You're a Christian. You're not an Eastern North Carolinian. You're not even primarily female or male or rich or poor or black or white. None of those things. If you're a Christian, your main identity is Christian. You are a child of God, and let the Spirit reconnect those wires. Your species sees greatness as servanthood. That's the way we see greatness. What's the next thing he tells us? That word first, he connects it with slave. Now, slaves in Roman culture was not as bad as chattel slavery, which we're familiar with, like African American slavery. That's called chattel slavery. It was much more an aggressive form than Roman slavery. Roman slavery could be entered into freely. If you wanted to pay off a debt, you could become a wealthy family slave. You could sign a contract for 8 months, 5 years, whatever, and they'll pay you this sum of money in return. But at the end of the day, nobody wanted to be a slave, okay? It might be better than chattel slavery, but it was still slavery, right? And there were some racial-based slavery where the Romans would conquer ethnic groups and just export them across the empire, and they would be slaves for the Romans on that side of the empire. And eventually they could work it off and become Roman. But still, no one wanted to be a slave, okay? Jesus is saying the first. So think about my Roman structure I gave you. Who's the first in the Roman pyramid? Caesar. Caesar sits on a throne of gold and silver. He can snap his finger and have massive buildings and monuments erected in his honor. He wears a golden crown and golden rings. Anything Caesar wants, Caesar's at the top of the pyramid. Caesar is first. Who is at the bottom in the Roman system? Slaves. So what is Jesus doing right now with the Jews and the Romans in this sentence? He's literally taking the entire power dynamic of his era and our era, if you think about it, and he's not rearranging it. He's not even editing it slightly. He's grabbing the whole stinking pyramid and flipping it upside down. Saying, no, when I come in power and glory, guess what? The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. He connects first with slave. So, who's first at Emmanuel? The slave of all. The humble server of all. Is that not amazing? Now, I know that we're not going to do this perfectly, but can you not see that we can get lost on so many other things about being Christians, and we just leave some major doctrines in the dust in our journey as being Christians? Let the Spirit convict you tonight and maybe try and correct those wires that get crossed, because I'm telling you, I'm this way. I love so many things. Theology, the Bible, expository preaching, all this different stuff we are passionate about. I get caught up in those things and learning more and more about those things, and sometimes it hits me, I haven't spent 10 minutes thinking about who I can serve this week. I haven't spent 10 minutes trying to be a slave to one of my brothers and sisters this week. Not 10 minutes. And look, we call ourselves Christians. We've got to reorient ourselves around the DNA of the kingdom, the way the kingdom and its structure works. So number 2, Jesus defines power differently as well. He defines power not as the ability to conform somebody to your will, but true power is this, church, the ability to conform to the will of God in the service of others. You want to know real, true inner power? It's not being able to control others get them to do what you want. According to Jesus, true power is having the strength to follow the will of God, even when it's difficult and when it calls for the radical service of those around you to detriment to yourself. Now, who's our best example of this? Jesus. There is no better example. Jesus came at infinite cost to his own person in order to save those that he loved. What an awesome example. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. I want you to think about this. Michael and I were at a restaurant eating, and he made a quote, and I didn't remember off the top of my head where it's from, but I realize now it's from here. And someone we were with, I can't even remember who at the time, was being rude to a waitress because they got something wrong on their order. And I can't even remember what they said. They had snapped off at the waitress or something like that. And Michael looks at me. It might not even been at our table. Michael looks at me and he's like, who did Jesus say he identified with? Is Jesus the one being waited on or the waiter? Jesus says right here, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. You want to know where Jesus would be in a kitchen? He's that waitress or waiter that you're treating terrible and won't tip and complain about every little thing they do wrong. He'd be that person, not the one sitting down getting waited on. That's a flip, isn't it? We think that you want to be the person sitting down having a steak, not the nasty, stinking waitress or waiter that's making, not hardly anything an hour and running back and forth. That's one of those low-ranking jobs. Well, that's Jesus for us today. Jesus is the server. Jesus is the waiter. The word is literally diakonos, which is where we get the word deacon, servant, serving, waiter. Our deacons and deaconesses are to be model servants, right? And I would encourage you, deacons, and those around you, to look to your deacons as that's the person I want to see how they serve so I can learn to serve. That should be the goal of a healthy deaconate. And that's the way Christ said that it should be. So, and then he said, and give his life a ransom for many. I love that. Jesus did not just come to literally use his divine superpowers to step up and say, and then we're saved, and then the enemy's gone, and then he went back to heaven. Is that how it worked? No. He became you. He did not come to save you using a magic spell. Do you get this? He had the ability to become like you. He decided to enter into your suffering. Everything you've experienced, he has been tested with. Your depression, your anxiety, your anger, your all those things that you have dealt with, he has been tempted with. He became sweating, stinking, walking human to save us. Can we think about that? And if our Savior can do that far more than that, you can never do that for another person like he could. If he can do that for us, for you and for me, then that empowers you to, well, I can figure out how to stop by the widow's house and let her know I love her. I can write a card to someone hurting in our church. I can drop a little extra money in the offering plate for the missionary. I can stop by the church and ask what I could do to tidy up something. Whatever, if you fill in the blank. That is the source of our ability to serve one another, is that we have been infinitely served in a way we can't even understand. So, and he gave his life for ransom for many. So if I were to put it in one word, the church's dynamic is lasting greatness equals sacrifice. True lasting greatness in the kingdom is sacrifice. Is self-abasement for those others. Put it in one word, self-sacrificing. So that's opposed to the world, right, which is self-serving, and the church is self-sacrificing. So how does this look? Well, to put it straightforward, we'll just say the bad first. Everybody ready? Buckle in. Christian service and sacrifice will mean a few hard things, okay? Let's look at those. Less comfort. If you live a life of service for others, then you're going to be uncomfortable sometimes. It will mean less time. right? You won't have that free time that you can just do whatever you want. If you spend a section of that serving others, then that means a little less time. It can mean less money. If you're helping the needs of your brothers and sisters around you, then when you give somebody $50 for gas, that means you have $50 less, okay? So that's some things it can mean, but what in the positive can it mean? It will mean more inconvenience. Sorry, this isn't positive yet. I have the positive one next. It can mean more inconvenience, more tiredness, more work, and this is a huge one, more mess. Anybody help somebody? So we have this vision of how it's going to be like when you help, right? Everybody know what I'm talking about? I see heads shaking. I love it. Well, we all have this vision of what it's like when you're going to help, right? You're going to prance down out of the sky, and you're going to pull out a $50 bill, crisp, and you're going to hand it to someone that needs help, and they're going to burst into tears and hug you and kiss you on the cheek, and then you're going to fly off into the sunset, right? That's the way we think of, that's our version of charity in our head. And guess what? When it doesn't go exactly the way you wanted it to go, you get mad about it. We're selfish about how we serve. We want the act of service to go the way we want it to go. But look, true service is being able to give something, and if they don't even value what you gave them, you got to be able to handle that. You might help somebody and keep it a secret, and they might not even know. Can you handle knowing that you helped them and they don't know? Can you handle that? Some people can't. I want them to know. Why? So they'll be thankful. No. You want the credit, right? This is hard. It is messy to help people. It is not cut, dry, and clean. It is messy. And us, when we're helping one another in our community around us, we've got to be at a place where we can handle the messy. Look, when you're going to help somebody, don't expect strings attached. Don't expect things to come back to you. You do it as unto the Lord, and don't care at all the way that person reacts. You're serving Christ, right? What did he say? Cup of cold water in my name. Who did you serve? Who did you clothe when they were naked? Who did you visit when they were in prison? Jesus, you weren't in prison. What are you talking about? He said, every time you did it to the least of these, you did it as unto me. So we serve as unto Jesus. We don't serve expecting things in return. So those are the hard things. This stuff really will happen, church, if we're a servant church. But when we serve, we cannot look at this as we're wanting something immediate. We are investing, okay? When we serve one another, when we serve others, we're investing. What do I mean by investing? Well, investments are what? Risky and difficult. If everybody got rich off investments and the stock market always went like this, guess what? We'd all be rich. We just put your money in, ding, you get a... No, that's not how investing works, right? Investing takes risk, and it can be difficult. Sometimes the market does what? It goes down, like it has recently. And you can lose money, right? And there's a risk there. Well, it's the same way. Look, you might invest in a person. I will brag about him. He'll kill me later, but Pastor Blake helped a person years ago. He modeled this really well in front of me. He helped a really, really difficult person that happened to be coming to our church at the time. She had mental health issues, a very traumatic past, and he helped her to a detriment to himself over and over and over. And I'm robbing him of his reward. I'm sorry, Blake. He just said, great. But look, she just randomly up and disappeared, cussed him to his face, and literally just disappeared. So guess what? Sometimes you invest in a person, and it's not going to go well. It literally may crash and burn and mean nothing to that person. But again, it's an investment, not in something we can see that we can get directly. It's an investment in the kingdom. It's an investment in something more. When done in faith, the yield is eternal. So it might seem risky, but when you invest in another person's life by serving that person, being the slave of that person, then you are investing in something eternal according to Jesus. It's not something you're trying to get in this life. You don't want anything from them. You are investing in a future reality. So get this last statement before we're done, and then we have one conclusion statement. I love this statement. When we meet Christ, It will be the scars we incur from crosses borne that will be our riches. And our earthly riches will be what we need healing from. Let me read that again. When we meet Christ, it will be the scars that we incur from crosses borne that will be our riches. And our earthly riches will be what we need healing from. Did you know our Savior stands resurrected, enthroned in power, scarred? Still scarred. So he bears to this day in his body the marks of his service to me and to you. It's actually a source of eternal glory for him, is it not? Because we get to look at him and see those scars and be reminded, that is my God. He does that to save me. He loves me that much. Well, when you meet Christ, those scars you incur from being treated wrong by somebody you helped, they're going to be the eternal weight of glory that's going to shine. You ain't going to need healing from those scars. The stuff you're actually going to need healing from is the earthly riches you spent your whole life pursuing. Because you're going to have to unlearn that that's not how the kingdom works. Up here, it's not about how much you got, it's about how much you give. Up here, it's not about how much power you wield, it's about how much service you render. You know, you're going to have to relearn the kingdom. Some Christians, sadly, are going to be so much strangers to their own kingdom that there's going to have to be a considerable amount of time learning the difference. It's going to be a culture shock. Well, we should hope and pray that as Christians, heaven isn't that much of a culture shock. We want to bring some of that here, right, in our church. So let's look to this conclusion, and hopefully this can wrap it all up. First of all, we can sacrifice only because of the infinite storehouse of life that Jesus has given us in the gospel. Now, everything I've given you tonight is moral imperatives. And I trust and hope that the Spirit has convicted you in some ways like He's convicted me. But I do want you to know, I'm not up here telling you that you've got to go do all these things to be a Christian accepted by God. Here's what's crazy, church. Y'all aren't these things, are you? This last 30 minutes that we've been describing this, I haven't been describing me, and I haven't been describing you. We don't do this well at Emmanuel. I don't think any church in the city does, because we're sinners. But here's the thing. Did you know, although you're not ultimately loving the way Jesus defines love, although you're not a servant the way Jesus defines service, He still has saved you. In spite of your sin and shortcoming, in spite of you being by your very DNA different than the way His kingdom works, He didn't kill James and John, did He? He said, yeah, you'll drink of my cup. He still was patient with them. He could have just, you idiots, you don't even know what you're saying. Can't you see how gentle He was with James, even the foolish James and John? He's more gentle still with you. You're all still here. He hasn't kicked you out. He hasn't turned you away. And we don't love each other like we should. All of this has been given to us freely from His storehouse of life. Jesus has poured it, just lavished it upon you. And did you know the only way you're going to grow in your ability to serve and love your neighbors in this church and your neighbors in the world, the only way is the power of that gospel. That's the thing that changes your heart. When you feel undeserving, when you feel, I'm a terrible servant, we get to look back to the ultimate servant, our Christ, our Jesus. He served us infinitely, and I'm secure in Him. And you know what? Therefore, I don't have to worry if I'm doing everything perfectly and God hates me, because I know God doesn't. He loves me in Jesus. And now I'm free to serve those around me. If I mess up, there's forgiveness. But I'm going to keep trying, because I'm not earning God's love. I'm a part of the sharing of that love that has been given to me. Second half of that statement. Through this process we're talking about, the greatness of God will shine in the midst of a self-seeking world. You want lost people to stop complaining about the church and how corrupt and all this mess it is? First of all, we can stop being corrupt. That'd be great. Stop doing a lot of things that are true, like hypocrisy, self-service, all that stuff, power. But another way, lost people are going to be compelled by a church that serves one another and those, their enemies, those different than them, in such a radical way they can't really explain it. Because I'm telling you, the world does not do this. They don't. You think of the tribes in your head. I don't want to say names, but just think of the political tribes in our head. Do they serve one another? No. Blue hates red, and red hates blue. It's that simple. The ideological tribes in our country, all the division, the sexual revolution tribe, the sexual conservatism tribe, all those different tribes, do they love one another? No. It's absolute war. We're completely against you, and you're completely against us. Jesus is describing a community that we stand on truth in God's Word, but we're not only called to love one another when we disagree, we're called to love our enemy. We read it this past week. The people that hate us and oppose us. That's a radical love, and I'm telling you, when the lost world sees this, there will be a shining light restored once again in the church. And it will draw people to the Savior. Because there's nothing like the all-powerful healing love of God. There's nothing like it. So that's what we're talking about this week. Your church, a serving church in a selfish world.